In the 2009 film District 9, humanity does not receive the aliens with a war, nor with a battle for survival. It receives them with fear, bureaucracy, television cameras, and a mixture of curiosity, contempt, and opportunism. The gigantic alien ship does not appear over New York, London, or any military capital of the world. It stops over Johannesburg, South Africa, as if the film wanted to make it clear from the very first moment that this would not be a traditional science fiction story, but a social wound disguised as extraterrestrial contact. For months, the ship remains suspended in the sky without emitting clear signals, without opening its doors, and without showing any intention of attacking. This leaves governments expectant, the population unsettled, and the media turns the phenomenon into a spectacle. But when humans finally decide to force their way in by cutting through the ship's structure, they do not find conquerors, explorers, or superior beings. They find something much stranger and more disturbing. More than 1 million sick, malnourished, confused aliens, completely incapable of organizing themselves. These creatures would become known by the derogatory term prawns, although the term did not refer to an actual crustacean. In South Africa, the word alludes to the so-called Parktown prawn, a large cricket that many residents of Johannesburg consider unpleasant, almost like a domestic pest. That is why, from the beginning, the name not only describes their insectoid appearance, but also the way humans choose to see them. Not as visitors, not as refugees, not as a lost civilization, but as an uncomfortable presence that had to be contained, isolated, and separated from the rest of society. The South African government, unable to understand them and at the same time pressured by public opinion, moves them to an improvised camp beneath the ship. That place was supposed to be temporary, a humanitarian aid zone, while the authorities decided what to do with them. But over the years, the camp transforms into a militarized ghetto marked by poverty, corruption, arms trafficking, and exploitation. That is how District 9 is born. The most disturbing thing is that the prawns are not wild beings in the strict sense. They are an intelligent species. It is obvious that they have language, emotions, advanced technology, weapons impossible for human science to replicate, and an extremely complex biology. However, most of them seem to act like a disoriented mass. Many do not understand their situation, do not react with any shared logic, and allow themselves to be manipulated by humans who scam them with cat food, rotten meat, or false promises. That contradiction is one of the keys to the film, because how can a species capable of building an intergalactic ship end up living among garbage, eating waste, and trading advanced weapons for cans of food? The answer does not lie only in their individual intelligence, but in the structure of their society, because the prawns do not function like humans. Their civilization appears to be organized in a more biologically hierarchical way, like a hive where each individual fulfills a specific function. The ship that arrived on Earth was not necessarily their entire civilization. Several theories suggest that it was a detached section of a larger structure, possibly a separate module from a main ship. Inside that section were mainly workers, technicians, soldiers, and lower caste beings. But something happened during the journey. The superior figure who was supposed to lead them, a kind of leader or royal individual, died or disappeared. And after losing that guidance, the entire colony became mentally and socially paralyzed. That is why the prawns the humans find inside the ship do not seem like invaders. They seem like survivors. They do not know what to do. They do not have full access to their own technology, and they do not have the collective capacity needed to reorganize themselves. They are part of an advanced civilization, but they have been separated from the brain that gave them direction. The simplest theory would be to think that the prawns were slaves being transported by another species, and that, after an accident, they were abandoned on Earth. This idea exists because the ship seems more like an enormous cargo vessel than a military or exploration craft. In the film, there are no clear signs of any kind of luxury, no social areas are shown, and most of the aliens seem too disoriented to be the creators of such technology. In addition, the black fluid that appears in the film has the ability to alter Wikus's body, progressively transforming him into one of them. That is why many have imagined that perhaps the prawns were not born that way, but were deliberately created or modified, or that there was simply a leak of this liquid. However, the explanation most consistent with what the film shows and with the material associated with its development is that the prawns do belong to their own civilization. An extremely advanced civilization, but also one deeply dependent on its internal structure. The ship would have departed from a distant region of space, possibly from another galaxy or a very distant system, on a mission of exploration, resource collection, or expansion. The prawns' home planet is mentioned as a world with several moons, larger than Earth and with environmental conditions compatible with the life of the species. The fact that they can breathe our atmosphere indicates that their biology developed in an environment with certain similarities to our own, even though their physiology is quite different. The prawns are bipedal, tall, strong, and covered by a dark exoskeleton with greenish, bluish, or orange tones depending on the individual. Their height seems to range from around 2 meters to a little over 2.5 meters, which makes them clearly larger and more intimidating than an average human being. Their face combines insectoid traits with a surprisingly human expressiveness. They have antennae, external mandibles, moving plates, and small facial appendages that seem to function both for feeding and communication, giving them an appearance somewhere between an insect, a crustacean, and a humanoid creature. Their hands have 3 fingers, but they are precise enough to manipulate complex technology. Their physical strength far surpasses that of humans. In the film, they are shown throwing a soldier with ease, breaking weapons with a single blow, and surviving conditions that would kill a normal person. But their chitinous, resilient appearance contrasts with their vulnerability. Many of them live terrified, confused, or resigned. Others become aggressive because of hunger, stress, or constant abuse. Their behavior cannot be understood without taking into account the 20 years of abandonment in District 9, because they do not seem to be a species naturally accustomed to functioning without hierarchy. They are broken creatures forced to live in an urban landfill, subjected to a humanity that is not interested in understanding them, but in taking advantage of them. Their diet also reveals a great deal about their condition. The prawns are mainly carnivorous and can consume raw meat, carrion, and different organic materials, including rubber and petroleum-based materials. On the ship, they probably fed on creatures or insects bred specifically as a food source. But after becoming stranded, that supply chain disappeared. On Earth, they had to adapt to anything available: garbage, animal remains, tires, soap, motor oil, bones, stray animals, meat sold at abusive prices, and, above all, cat food. This specifically becomes a kind of drug for them. It is not completely clear whether this is a chemical reaction, a sensory preference, or a combination of smell, fat, texture, and protein that stimulates their nervous system. But in District 9, that weakness is used as a tool of control. Humans turn it into a bargaining currency. Criminals take advantage of it to obtain alien weapons. And the prawns themselves, desperate to get it, end up handing over technology worth millions for a few cans. This social degradation does not prove that they are inferior. It shows what happens when an intelligent species is reduced to little more than savage refugees at the mercy of hunger, isolation, and opportunism. The film uses that image to show how a dominant society can turn another group's needs into a form of modern slavery. But the central question is what really happened inside the ship before its arrival on Earth. Everything indicates that there was a crisis, either biological, such as a leak of the mutagenic fuel, or structural, that killed the commanding figure and left the rest of the crew without direction. If the prawns function as a caste-based society, the death of their leader would not only be a political loss, but a neurological and social catastrophe. The workers were not designed to make strategic decisions. The soldiers could protect, but not reorganize a civilization. The technicians could repair systems, but not necessarily command the entire colony. And the lower-ranking individuals did not have full access to the critical areas of the ship. This would explain why, when humans finally enter the ship, they find the aliens locked in, hungry, and sick. They were not waiting to attack. They were trapped inside their own systems. Many doors could not be opened because the present individuals did not have the necessary biological authorization, since their technology seems to recognize DNA, internal hierarchies, and perhaps specific biochemical signals. Without the right individuals, the ship stopped being an escape vehicle and became a prison. At some point, the ship must have activated automatic emergency protocols. If an illness or internal contamination killed a superior figure, the system may have released part of the alien fluid to stabilize the population. That black liquid is one of the most important substances in District 9 because it functions at the same time as fuel, a technological interface, and a biological agent capable of rewriting living organisms. That is why when Wikus comes into contact with it, he does not simply die from an infection. His DNA begins to be reconfigured until it becomes compatible with prawn biology. First, his arm changes, then his body begins to adapt from within, and finally the transformation progresses as a complete physical conversion. This also explains why alien weapons can only function in the hands of the prawns or of someone with enough active prawn DNA. The technology of this species does not separate machines and living organisms the way humans do. Their weapons, ships, and almost all other technology are biomechanical. They are built to read life, not just commands. Because of this, they do not obey just anyone. First, they need to recognize a biological signature. That is why MNU, the corporation responsible for controlling the aliens, cannot use the arsenal despite having it in storage. For this corporation, the prawns are not refugees. They are an economic opportunity. Their weapons represent an incalculable military market. They know that an alien gun can instantly destroy a human body. One of their exosuits can turn a single user into a combat unit superior to any conventional soldier. Their energy systems, projectiles, and defensive technology are far beyond anything humanity can produce. But none of it works with human DNA. That is why MNU begins experimenting on them. First, they try to manipulate the weapons, dismantle them, or reprogram them. Then they study the prawns, dissect their bodies, analyze their tissues, and search for a way to force compatibility. Eventually, they move on to more brutal methods, embryo testing and hybridization experiments. The film shows us laboratories where remains of technology, eggs, bodies, and weapons are stored, making it clear that this place is not a humanitarian research center, but a factory of exploitation. When Wikus is contaminated with the fluid, MNU accidentally finds what it had been searching for years: a human who can activate prawn weaponry. For the corporation, Wikus stops being an employee or even a person. He has now become a strategic opportunity. But back to the prawns. The reproductive biology of the prawns also contributes to the fear humans feel toward them. The film shows that they lay eggs, and that those eggs can develop while connected to a source of nutrients, usually meat. Although it is not explained in detail whether their reproduction works exactly like that of terrestrial animals, several interpretations of the lore describe them as hermaphroditic or monoecious organisms, capable of producing offspring without a sexual division comparable to that of humans. This makes their reproduction seem grotesque from our perspective, but in reality, it follows an efficient biological logic. The young do not develop inside the body as they do in mammals, but inside an external structure that requires constant nutrition. The adults can be protective of their eggs, although MNU treats them as hazardous waste and even destroys them with total coldness. The speed at which the population grows inside District 9 becomes an excuse to justify greater control over them. Humans do not see them as families, but as a plague that multiplies. This detail connects directly to the language used against them. They are called non-humans, prawns, creatures, or simply the problem. They are rarely recognized as individuals with bonds, fear, pain, or hope. Even when there is talk of relocating them to District 10, the official language sounds administrative. But what is really happening is a mass expulsion. The figure of Wikus is fundamental because, at the beginning, he represents bureaucratic coldness and is not meant to be presented as a traditional villain. He is not intentionally cruel. He is simply an employee trying to do his job, although he is incapable of questioning the system he serves. When he arrives in District 9 to deliver eviction orders, he speaks in a friendly tone while taking part in abuse, intimidation, and the destruction of homes. This is one of the harshest ideas in the film because dehumanization does not always appear as clear and open hatred. Sometimes it is more subtle. Wikus begins the story by seeing the prawns as an inconvenience in his work. He does not understand them, and he does not want to understand them either. But when his body begins to transform, his place in society changes immediately. The same humanity that once protected him turns him into an object of pursuit, which is deeply ironic. His wife is used to manipulate him. His superiors betray him. The media presents him as a threat, and MNU tries to dissect him on a laboratory table to exploit his mutation. That's why the film presents his physical transformation into a prawn as a moral inversion. The less human he appears on the outside, the more human he becomes on the inside. He begins to experience the same fear, vulnerability, and dependence that the extraterrestrials suffered. For the first time, he understands what it means to be treated as something inferior. And in that process, Christopher Johnson stops being a strange creature to him and becomes his only chance of salvation. Christopher is different from most of the prawns we see. He is intelligent, reserved, technical, and capable of planning for years. He is not exactly the lost leader of his species, but he does belong to a more advanced caste, probably related to engineering or systems maintenance. For 2 decades, he collects small amounts of alien fluid hidden inside pieces of technology scattered throughout District 9. His goal is to activate the command module hidden beneath his house, return to the ship, and come back with help. The fact that it took him 20 years shows how scarce the fuel was. It also suggests that, from the beginning, Christopher understood the seriousness of his species' situation on Earth better than anyone else. His son, small but surprisingly intelligent, confirms that even the young of this species can understand advanced technology from an early stage. This indicates that the potential of the prawns did not disappear. It was simply repressed by the inhuman conditions of District 9. The question of why no one came to rescue the prawns remains one of the most important. If the ship that arrived on Earth was only a separate section of a larger structure, then there should be a main module, a mothership, or a central part of prawn civilization capable of receiving signals. Christopher seems to believe he can reach it, and he tells Wikus that it would take him 3 years to return with the technology needed to cure him. That means the road home is not immediate, but it is not impossible either. But the most disturbing explanation is that the disaster did not affect only the module that arrived on Earth. Perhaps the main ship was also damaged. Perhaps the disease that killed the commanding figure spread beyond this section. Or perhaps distance, lack of fuel, and loss of communication made any rescue impossible. What matters is that the prawns spent 20 years waiting for help that never came. And in that vacuum, humanity took control of their fate. MNU's behavior shows that the problem was not only political, but also economic. The corporation did not want to solve the alien crisis. It wanted to turn it into its property. The relocation to District 10 was not the humanitarian solution they presented it as, but an operation to isolate the prawns even further and better control their bodies, their weapons, and their resources. To do this, and under the discourse of public safety, MNU builds a system where the aliens have no real rights. Their homes can be destroyed, their eggs can be burned, their bodies can be dissected, their weapons can be confiscated, and any resistance is interpreted as a threat. The irony is that the prawns possess the technology and the capacity to destroy their oppressors, but most of them cannot use it in an organized way. The weapons were probably part of the ship's defensive arsenal, or they were being transported somewhere else before the accident. But the important thing is that these weapons also reveal something important about the mentality of the prawns. They are designed to respond only to their biology, to prevent them from being used by external species. They could even have internal restrictions to prevent certain uses against other prawns. Although Wikus's transformation shows that once his DNA reaches sufficient compatibility, the system recognizes him as a valid user. This relationship between body and technology is what MNU is trying to break. The ending of the film does not resolve the conflict. Christopher escapes with his son and promises to return. Wikus is left behind, completely transformed, hiding among the ruins of District 9, making small metal flowers for his wife. And it is that image that sums up the entire tragedy. The man who once signed eviction orders now lives as one of the beings he helped persecute. But even after becoming a prawn, Wikus keeps his human side. District 9 represents the prawns in an interesting way, because they are not monsters in the classic sense. Their design may seem repulsive, their movements may be unsettling, and their biology may appear unpleasant. But the film does not use them only to provoke fear. It uses them to force the viewer to look at their own reaction. At first, many humans within the story see them as animals, but the more their suffering is observed, the more evident it becomes that the true monstrosity is not in their appearance, but in the system that reduces them to living garbage. That was what District 9 director Neil Blomkamp wanted to tell, and why the film was so good. Because it mixes hard science fiction, body horror, mockumentary, and to a greater extent, social criticism. The arrival of the prawns is not presented as a fantasy of first contact or as a story about invaders, but as a reinterpretation of forced displacement, segregation, institutional racism, and corporate exploitation. All of these are social problems that South Africa has faced. The name District 9 directly recalls the real history of South Africa and the places where entire populations were expelled, separated, and pushed into marginalized areas for political and racial reasons. The film replaces humans with extraterrestrials, but the logic of oppression remains recognizable. That is why the prawns are so important within modern science fiction cinema. They do not simply represent the alien, they represent the other, the foreigner, the refugee, the group that a society decides to treat as a threat in order to avoid recognizing it as a victim. Their insectoid appearance allows humans to justify any abuse. If they look like monsters, then empathy can be denied to them. If they are called a plague, then their home can be destroyed. If they are reduced to a faceless mass, then no one has to ask who they were before they fell into disgrace. In the end, these creatures remain a mystery in many ways. We do not fully know their planet, their history, their higher castes, or the fate of the main ship. Nor do we know whether Christopher will return, whether he will keep his promise, or whether he will come back with a cure, with help, or with a force capable of confronting humanity. But that uncertainty is part of the film's strength. District 9 does not need to answer everything, because its true impact is not only in the alien mystery, but in the unanswered questions it leaves behind. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.